All right, we're live. All right, so right now we're gonna do a quick little intro into China and China's attempts to attract people to come to China, basically. So everyone knows the United States is, a country built on immigrants, and millions of people, basically a million people a year, come to this country. They get green cards. They have to wait often for the green card. It's a whole process. It's terrible, but eventually you get it. And the United States attracts an enormous amount of people. There's way more demand to come to the United States than there is supply, right? There are caps on the number of people that can come to the country, and there's different categories. There's just the basic ways, like you just prevent people from coming in if they just walk in. You make certain pathways for highly trained people, highly skilled people with certain whatever, and you just make buckets of them and you let a certain number of people in every year. It's a hugely contentious political debate in the United States. How many people should be let in? How does this impact the character of the country? How does this impact this and that? That's the way it goes. So we've all heard those immigration debates for years, and they're really not going anywhere. And actually, they're going to get much worse. So anybody who managed to become a new citizen, congratulations. But the really cool thing is this is not normal. So most countries don't attract other people, and that's what we're going to talk about today with China, because China has a hilarious situation with trying to attract talent. So really quick, we'll talk about China trying to attract foreign talent. Why this is pretty ironic and going to be unsuccessful. Some of the hard numbers behind it. A little bit into the lurking demographic problem, which I'm just going to basically always bring up now because it's getting really insane. And then kind of what all this says about China and its sense of its own capacities, and really even sense of what it is or what it isn't or what it can be. It's getting very skewed these days. So we're just going to quickly go over some of this. And we're going to talk about this now. Is Xi Jinping, for the last many years, China's been trying to increase the number of people that come into the country. So Xi Jinping recently just said that China is going to exhaust all means to lure global talent into China for obvious reasons. I mean, China doesn't want just more people. It wants more really talented, skilled people to come to the country. And China's been able to attract a lot of people to come work in the country or be there for a little bit or be there with their company. But to get them to stay and like become citizens and to have control over the intellectual property, all that kind of stuff, that has been way tougher. But China knows this is a really big deal. It doesn't really have everything that it needs. And yeah, I mean, so China's trying to become self-sufficient in all sorts of technologies and to deal with the US, Western conflict that's going on with China. But it knows at the same time, like, here's Xi Jinping's quote is that, you know, the emphasis on independent cultivation of talent must not mean self-isolation. What he's trying to say in a really weird translation is that even if you're trying to be, cultivate internal Chinese talent, that doesn't mean you can be totally isolated from the rest of the world. That means you'll probably get backward. You'll be, pulled away from most of the important economic, social, technological, labor trends that are going on in the world. And you can't do that. You're going to become backward in various ways. So what China needs to do is, again, quote, create a talent system with global appeal and competitive advantage. And he even says specifically that the focal point for this strategic talent, the main area that they're trying to get people into the country is obviously technology. Everything in China and really in a lot of countries is about technology. And it's obvious reasons why. But this is, first of all, this is just a naked description of what China wants and what it needs and what it feels it lacks. If we just pay attention to what he's saying, he's like, well, we need more really talented people that are skilled with technology. We don't have enough. And we have to make big announcements on this kind of stuff because very few people seem to be coming to the country. So this is what they're trying to do. And it's all hugely ironic because the reason that no one comes to China is pretty obvious. Look at China. I mean, look at me, even me personally. I didn't want to stay in China beyond or go back even after 2015 because it was becoming so difficult to discuss ideas, to talk to people who would used to be able to, used to have a normal conversation with them. They won't say anything anymore. The fear of saying the wrong thing, of thinking the wrong thing, all this was getting insane. And it's much worse now because it's been such a backlash and so many people have been hit by these various campaigns. And also the level of control, the sophistication of the technological controls are intense. And what's ironic too is that China often wants some of these new technologies to help it better control its people. So in other videos, I'm going to talk about how the United States is right now banning all sorts of super innovative Chinese technology companies because a lot of these Chinese innovations are coming in the form of surveillance technologies and just various pretty heinous kind of things that you're doing to control your population, at least heinous from the Western perspective. So that is a really big um, difference. And it's funny because, again, it's just ironic because you're trying to attract, um, trying to be attractive to all these smart, hardworking people. And then they don't want to live in a place where you can't be smart and independent and autonomous and hardworking and all that and feel like you're contributing to something that doesn't have a bit of a dark end of it, right? So why would someone who's really smart and wants to go make the world a better place at Google or whatever, why would they go to China? I mean, you can make large arguments about keeping Chinese state and the Chinese, people from warring against each other and how valuable that is and all of that. That's all true. And just the basic developmental growth of China. That's all good. So there's less poverty around the world. That's all true. But when you look at what China is doing now and what's clearly coming to the fore, it's like, well, who'd want to be a part of this, right? How do you actually attract people? And the big country to compare to, which is why I start with this, is the United States. So just some hard numbers here. The United States admits about 1 million people a year. Admits and gives them green cards, gives them the path, long-term permanent residency, and a path to citizenship in the country. China admits about 10,000 people. That's 100 times more. I mean, that means that China would need 100 years to admit as many people as the U.S. admits in 1 year. And everyone, you can think, oh, there's a lot of people in China. It doesn't matter, doesn't it? But China needs these people, and these aren't. Well, actually, for the U.S., there's all sorts of people that are admitted for all sorts of reasons, but a lot of it is for family reunification and stuff. But let's say you had what China wanted, and you had a system that was entirely focused on getting the most capable people to the most capable people into the country that you can, right? If the US can do that and get 1 million and China can only get 10,000, that's really bad because these are supposed to be the highest value, highest skilled, most um, useful people that you can get. And yeah, I mean, it's also really a lot more than that. I mean, the United States has all these political battles about immigration, but the actual number of people that want to move to the United States every year is insane. It's millions of people. The US could admit probably 5 million people a year if it wanted. It could rearrange its immigration system to be focused on people with really valuable skills in technology and biotechnology and various commercial technologies and anything. IT, it doesn't really matter. You could make all these categories for this sort of stuff. Uh, and China's kind of trying to do something like that, but the natural attractiveness of China to these people is just so much smaller. Um, it gets back. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but it gets back to this fact that the United States was built off of immigrants. It was always attractive to immigrants, and it's not because it's because of all the freedoms and stuff that you got in the liberal or sort of the government that gave you the sort of freedom to try out different things and do different businesses and do all this kind of stuff. That's a big thing. But it's also naturally attractive. I mean, it has the capital, it has the culture, it has the separation from the rest of the world and from all these conflicts. Like, why would you want to go to China if you're going to be right across from Taiwan, or you're going to be in a possible conflict with all of any of the countries that are around there, right? Even though the U.S. is at war, has been at war basically the entire 21st century, you don't ever experience it. It's not in your face. And it's very different if you're in Europe or you're in, if you're next to Russia, Eastern Europe, you see all that. You're near Ukraine, you're worried, all that. Or you're anywhere near Eastern China. It's just, well, Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and all this. Maybe nothing happens, but also that hurts, right? And more importantly, China had to create a very different sort of culture than the United States to deal with where it came in the world and what it is and what it has to deal with. So this isn't a place that's open to foreigners. Um, China already has a demographic problem, which maybe we'll talk about, but adding in non-Chinese foreigners to China is almost not. It's extremely difficult, but basically just not going to happen. I mean, you look at Japan, which has had a demographic problem known to everyone for the world for like 30 years, and it has not been able to even barely nudge the number of non-Japanese people that are allowed in the country. And China has been trying to create a sort of multi-ethnic state since the 19th century, since the Qing dynasty, but that really hadn't worked entirely. And it's the autonomous, all the stuff that's done currently to deal with the multiple ethnicities in China. This is still very much a situation where the Han Chinese, it's their China. And there's other people who are in the peripheral regions who they conquered and they have to deal with, and they have to kind of make not restive and angry and out of hand, but how many minorities are in any major government position? It's like zero. So that's how it's going to stay. But yeah, you can't actually get this immigration that you want. I mean, the vast majority of immigration to China, like of this 10,000, it's overseas Chinese people who are of Chinese. Overseas Chinese is actually a communist public term, but it doesn't matter. The basically people of Chinese ethnicity who live elsewhere outside of China and often in Southeast Asia or obviously in the United States and the west coast of North America in particular, and Europe and major capital cities and stuff, and a lot of liberal democracies around the world. So you get people who do move to China, and there's a lot of interesting history. I mean, a lot of some of the really impressive technological advancements, whether it's in jet propulsion or various space systems and even agriculture, all these things, there's been a lot of scientists or a lot of people who were either Chinese and lived in the United States or Europe and then moved back to China, or people who were Chinese and got educated in the United States and lived there for a while, maybe thought they were going to live forever and live forever, thought they were going to live in the United States for the rest of their lives. They ended up moving back to China for various reasons. And that is a that is the biggest boost that China gets from immigration, and it's probably going to stay that way forever because there are so many problems in China that it's going to be hard to move them. And again, this demographic problem is a really, really big thing. I mean, what this all says is, China has a large population, right? So there's over a billion people there, but that doesn't mean you have all the people you need. Why would China be talking about global talent and global, being luring in global talent and being attractive and all these kind of things if it's 1 billion plus population was more than enough, right? So what you actually find almost always is that large populations, they don't have everything and they actually cause all sorts of problems. You just can't even manage most large populations. It's a big reason why India, which is going to grow by hundreds of millions of people, most likely in the next couple of decades, it's almost going to be impossible for it to really develop because it can't even handle the number of people that it already has. And then this is a pretty common story since the 19th century and the 18th century too, when the basically started to have big agricultural booms and improvements in human life and less mortality and all this, and you got a massive population explosion. Everyone's worried about what's going to happen to all the people. And we don't worry about that anymore. But actually, if you have a large country trying to educate and house and clothe and make productive every single person, it is really tough already. And China has a whole cultural problem for its millennials right now, where so many people, it's called, I mean, there's stuff all around the world right now, but in China, they often call it like the lying flat movement, lying flat generation, lying flat, whatever you want to call it. But basically, the massive opportunities that people were perceiving in industries like technology, which China's trying to attract more people in, there's a great sense that the big IPOs, the big companies have already formed, and that there's no longer the same sense of promise and opportunity for all the workers who are slaving away every day, you know, 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, nine to nine, 6 days a week, basically the 996 sort of thing. That is difficult already. But if you start adding in people from foreign countries, hey, let's take as many Ukrainians as possible. Let's take in as many Argentines and people from Equatorial Guinea who are like the smartest people in their countries. Let's bring them all in too. What happens to the massive, Chinese millennial population that was so invested in themselves getting the great benefits of China's economic growth and expansion and technological advancement, and that doesn't really happen anymore. So you're facing a whole host of problems that really can't be solved. And the only reason that Xi Jinping is even talking about this stuff is because the technologies that China needs are it needs so many new technologies to solve so many issues that it can't get a handle on any other way. So it has to do anything it can to improve this situation, but you just have inbuilt things you can't get over. You can't get over the fact that Chinese nationalism and ethnic identity and Chinese identity are all really intertwined. So you can't have, the best person to become a Chinese citizen is someone who's historically Chinese and speaks Chinese. And if you don't, it's going to be super hard for the country to convince you to come or for the people to want to come. And anyone who's kind of lived in China for a while knows and can feel some of the things that are going on. So that's obvious. But this broader thing, what it should really get people ready to think about is that talent, like everything gets not talent. I mean, talent's such a weird word. It feels like you're an agent in a Hollywood agency or whatever. But basically, people's labor is really the most valuable thing you have. Any company that's just relying on old capital, that it had, like a bunch of money that it has, a bunch of capital goods that it has, a lot of like assets and equipment and stuff. All of that was just made by other people before. You can even think of it as just like an embodied form of human labor. if you want to get really sort of interested in the Marxist angle on this kind of stuff. But that's not even what I'm talking about. Like the truth is, it all comes back down to labor. If you're trying to innovate in any field, if you're trying to develop any sort of new product, new service, sort of enhancement to a current product or service, you need people to sort of do the work to do that. And the battle in almost any really really advanced company or industry, all of the battle is about attracting the smartest people. So just to use an example, like Elon Musk, for example, whatever you think about him, his whole persona and the sort of visionary technology progress vision and the sort of vision of technological progress that he's really able to cultivate is enormously attractive to some of the smartest and most technologically savvy people in the world. They want to go build things that get humanity into the stars. They want to go build the types of cars that are going to transform the entire, industrial base in most countries and improve the world in the process, right? These are extremely motivating things. And you don't, I mean, seems intangible, but this is the stuff that really keeps people. We're living in a world where laborers and workers and everyone has more leverage than ever after COVID and during COVID and all this. Every company is trying to figure out what to give employees and workers to keep them around, to make them stay. And it's like the core problem. If all your smart people leave, what do you have left, right? And obviously everyone is valuable, but the if you're like Facebook and you're Google and you're competing to make some product and the engineers that you have like they're 10 times, more efficient than your competitors, it's like you obviously you need to get things right, but you often just win. In particularly in like sort of the computing space, it's well known that almost all these conflicts are conflicts over labor. Like, can you keep people motivated and engaged and productive and working on the right problems, like optimizing the right solutions for the right questions? If you do that, you do extremely well. If you can't do that, you don't do well. And China writ large right now is just leveling the technological innovation in the country. I mean, it's astounding how much the need for government political control is starting to really, really redirect and reorient a lot of the sort of natural innovation, technological innovation that was going on in China. So everyone knows about Jack Ma, everyone knows about all these other things, but there's just an insane amount of government intrusion into all these sort of frontiers. And the government probably itself knows it. And so it's again trying to find new vectors because it needs to maintain political control of technology, which is very threatening, but it also needs technology to solve all of these problems that it can't solve on its own. And you can't really square this circle, but you do get hilarious sort of articles and pronouncements and all this stuff where, Xi Jinping will say, "Oh, China will be the great global mecca of, innovation and labor talent and blah 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 all around the world." It's like, no, it probably won't, but you have really no other choice because if you're not, how are you going to solve all these problems? So that's where we are. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll probably actually pretty soon I'll talk about actually some of the big technological shifts that are going on in China just to give a bit of the further context for this. But in the meantime, don't worry that China is suddenly going to become the, I don't know, mecca for global immigration. It's just never going to happen.